My name is Larry Gillespie. I joined SAP June of last year after nearly 30 years with another very large Fortune 100 company. I joined as a principal enterprise architect. Really, I've been doing this work for probably more than 15 or 20 years anyway. And so, that's my focus. That's 100% of my focus is on that now. Let's talk a little bit about the journey that the customer goes through to achieve the value. This is a really busy slide. I'm not going to hit every single point on this slide, but it exemplifies something. The journey's complex. We talk about discovery, we talk about selecting the software, we talk about adoption, we talk about deriving the value from it, and then there's some ongoing activities after that. And every single one of these aspects of your journey has multiple facets to it. First, you have to kind of understand what SAP does in the very beginning, right? Well, you guys, most of you are here because you've already been through that. You've been through your initial engagement. You've been through the process of getting corporate sponsors internally to fund the engagement, to fund the purchase of the software, or the SaaS solution, or whichever one it is, or more. You've been through the process of working through the discovery on what your processes actually are that you're executing in your corporation, how those map into SAP. And if you haven't done that, this will be a really great time to talk about this process right here, because in fact, that is one of the most critical parts of obtaining the value, is figuring out not only how are you using the software, how are you executing processes today, and in the case where you may be using an older version of SAP, how you're using that component of the software, but how that then translates into the new world. Because SAP, and if you haven't been paying attention, I'm sure you have, over the last 10 years, SAP has really, really changed as a product. And frankly, it changes. Now it's quarterly, worst case, and in some cases monthly. Right? BTP functions just appear out of nowhere. The rollout schedule is insane. But that is a great, great thing for you, because you can then adapt to and adopt these new processes, bringing greater value right away. Right? I'm not, as I said, I'm not going to go through all this, and I'm about 10 minutes behind already, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. As I said, I was with a Fortune 100 company, long-time SAP customer, all the way back into the 1990s, with a very, very complex architecture and the contract to support it. Before moving to RISE, we were on ECC6, DB2, running on some IBM mainframe. As we moved into the RISE project, the idea of getting off of our on-prem into a cloud-based solution, what we discovered pretty quickly is that our contracts were super complicated. And this is going to sound nuts probably to you guys, but the contract and the alignment of the entitlements that you have through the contract, period by period by period, needs to be aligned with the planning that you're doing. Because if it's not, you're not going to achieve the value fast enough. Right? And that's ultimately why I decided to make this presentation to you guys. Okay. In the case of where I came from, deployment planning was not coordinated between any of the teams. We had 30 separate installations of SAP. And at that point in time, every one of those had their own processes, procedures, and governance models. There was no centralized governance to speak of. Now, this goes back quite a ways. So, the truth is that hopefully you're past that already, but I'm just setting the stage for how complicated that particular architecture was to move into RISE, because you have to surmount all of that. And it wasn't well planned out from an overall enterprise perspective. Each of the 30 would try to plan their own deployments, but at the end of the day, you cannot run an enterprise-wide software package that way. So we had to make some serious changes in how we approached the entirety of analyzing the contracts and planning for and deploying the software. So how can you accelerate the value that you're getting? You guys have seen a bunch of these things already in other discussions that you've had. If you've done any readings or learnings from SAP in the last 2 years, some of this will be repeat. I'm not going to go through it in remarkable detail, but the ways that you can accelerate your value are to, first and foremost, use the reference processes, the reference architecture, the reference business models. All of those things are built on top of thousands of customers and dozens of years of SAP having experience in various industries with various customers. Over time, that process model and that industry-specific process models where they exist have grown in complexity to really be able to take the place of core processes at many companies. I would say over 90%. That's my estimate, not SAP's estimate. So I'll let you challenge me on that if you'd like to. But the root of it is, let's take a look at your business process. Let's compare it to this standardized baseline of processes that we have accumulated over years and see where the gaps are. Every one of those places where there's a gap, there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity for improvement. There's an opportunity for change. There's an opportunity to increase the rate at which you bring the value to your company. Likewise, utilizing the RISE with SAP methodology as you're coming into RISE, and GROW has a similar methodology, but being that it's greenfield, it's slightly different. However, the RISE with SAP methodology is there to help guide the entirety of the process from all the way from pre-contract discovery through the time you're operational and running, right? And that's handling process, architecture, governance, various forms of enablement, education, training, change management, and then building up the backbone of the actual solution. In today's world, that also means building up a solution that is the capability for AI to be helpfully deployed. The other thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough, before we even begin, we need to talk about the integrated tool chain that SAP provides. That's the combination of LeanIX, Signavio, SAP's Cloud ALM. Another one that's not on here is SAP for Me, which is a core part of how you as a customer manage your side of the house. Tricentis for testing, Synity for data mapping and data migration, right? But at the very beginning, we really need to focus on Cloud ALM, SAP for Me, LeanIX, and Signavio. The others can come in later phases, but until we have at least Cloud ALM sorted, we're not very well empowered to understand the complexity of your own landscape. Okay. So, using business AI, that's Joule and the agentic agents, et cetera, and Business Data Cloud is, in today's world, going to be one of the fastest value accelerators that you can have. Why? Because it is 100% the way that customers can achieve various forms of very rapid improvement in processes. We'll go through everything that's on the slide, but if you focus on the bottom right here, this is straight out of our current annual report, okay? These are facts that are provided to us straight from our customers. 25% a weekly working time saved per consultant using Joule for Consultants at Siemens, 25% of time savings. That's and I personally have experienced that. I think if you talk to some of the architects that are there in Newtown Square this week, you'll find that many of them have also experienced it. Joule for Consultants is really a premier way to get information about various aspects of implementation, whether it's the technical side of, I'm trying to implement a printer in Rise and I don't know how to do that, or it's, hey, I need to know for this version of the software which APIs are available. You can ask questions of it and it will tell you in very great detail exactly what the answer is. Of course, you always have to do a little bit of digging to make sure that you understand the thoroughness of the answer, but it certainly is a huge time savings. This is much better than poking through a bunch of different websites and going to Google and just typing a word in or a couple of phrases in to see what you get, right? So my point here is, don't push AI and then the underlying component of Business Data Cloud, which supplies the data to AI in the ultimate solution. Don't push that off until the end. Don't say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and just get this thing over and then we'll figure it out later. It's okay if you want to execute on that later, but plan for it today. I was struck by this quote from Harry S. Truman. You can always amend a big plan, but you can never expand a little one. I don't believe in little plans. I believe in plans big enough to meet a situation we can't possibly foresee now. This quote, to me, speaks volumes of the complexity of planning. If we could foresee everything that could happen, we could build a plan that was precise and exact and correct all the way at the very beginning, but we can't. Just because we can't foresee the future doesn't mean that we shouldn't make some judgments as to what we think is going to happen and then base a baseline plan on facts that we document, assumptions that we document. So now we're going to come to the core of the discussion, which is adoption planning. What the heck is adoption planning? You hear it in different ways and in different forms, and it actually does mean different things to different people. We have entire processes inside of SAP that we refer to as adoption planning. That's a little bit different than adoption planning from your perspective. From the customer perspective, an adoption plan is really an enterprise-wide plan on how you're going to modify business operations, IT technologies, software stacks, and ultimately the roles and how people perform the roles based on really a thoughtful process, gathering facts, business needs, aligning with the business executives and the corporate goals. These are all things that your architects are there for you to help you with anyway, right? Aligning them with the contract and trying to make sure that you get a proper return on your investment, and in the cases where it's possible to do so, to accelerate that achievement of the ROI. It also is there a question?
No, I don't think so. Any questions? Or?
Okay.
Keep going.
Yeah. All right, so it gives you an opportunity to identify and plan for innovations as new products are released. And that's because this is a cyclical process. It's not a one-time planning process. And unfortunately, many of us have executed this type of process at the beginning of a project and then never gone back and cycled back through it in totality. We tend to take it in small chunks, and it is cyclical, but it's only cyclical for what's coming up in the next year. This type of planning really needs to be a little bit more extensive than that, because you're planning for the long term, not only the long term health and growth of your company, but you're also planning for being able to adopt new things as they come out, things you can't even envision yet. If you don't have a process to take in what all those new changes are, bounce them up against your current processes, or maybe even future business models that your company hasn't even thought about yet, but could think about as a result of a new software that's being deployed, then now you could see the value of being able to plan this in advance and plan towards something instead of just planning for a deployment. All that being said, we'd have to talk about how do you define the word adoption? Right? Again, lots of different meaning inside SAP from the customer's perspective, but we could probably all agree on it being a strategic, ongoing process of taking your huge investment in SAP software into all of your business processes where it fits and it makes sense to drive better business results. Okay? It goes beyond just talking about your initial deployment. It talks about meaningfully engaging with your organization and driving change in such a way that it either increases your revenue, brings down your cost, opens up new markets, any of those things, or all of them, right? And you could look at it and say adoption itself has multiple facets. I can boil it down to 3 here, but if you look at it really more carefully, it's every one of these 3 line items that I have under the 3 primary aspects has another 3 to 10 aspects to them. And so first, I would talk about the breadth and depth of the actual usage, which I know some of us are frustrated with not being able to measure very easily. Right? So it's a matter of taking stock of what you're actually using in real terms. If you have a product that you've procured through a contract with SAP that is a per user license, for example, it would be useful to know how many users are actually consuming that service. If you have 1,000 users in your license, but you only have 100 users logging in and using it, you're underutilizing it. And that can come from a couple of different places. It can come from, some challenges in the planning up front, purchasing too much. It can also come from delays in scheduled deployments. It can come from a lot of things. But until you bring the planning and the contract into alignment, you're going to constantly have this gap of either under consuming, or even worst case for you guys would be over consuming, because it becomes very expensive to over consume. The second aspect is the consumption tied to your specific entitlements. In order to be able to do that kind of analysis, you really need to be familiar with the contract. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in another slide, but the complexity of the contract can be a little daunting if you're not a contracts person. But at a minimum, what you need to understand is what materials you've purchased, how each of those materials that you purchased is priced and sold, how many units you purchased, and then you have the basis to understand whether or not you're behind or ahead of your rollout plan to fully utilize it. Okay. And then after we go through these 2 very important aspects of adoption planning, is when we can actually start to begin seeing the business value that we've achieved. There's a bunch of questions under the guise of adoption and consumption. Right? What are the key value milestones? What are the challenges that you have in your current rollout and adoption plans? What is your implementation plan currently? Are you prepared for the changes that the SAP solution is going to introduce? Anybody that's gone from ECC to S4 will know that while the stack is fundamentally similar, it's dissimilar enough that certain processes that you utilized in ECC aren't there in S4. And likewise, there's a ton of new processes in S4 that were never there in ECC. And that becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger gap as S4 continues to progress year after year after year, which is also part and parcel of why, as you're going through your planning, my personal advice would be plan for either an N-1 or N style deployment. You either want to be on either the very latest version of the software, which is going to give you the best value from a functional perspective, or the latest -1. Don't fall prey to the old style of implementation where we're talking about we might do an upgrade every 3 years because it's so daunting. If you go through some of the things we're going to talk about, it won't be as daunting as it has been in the past. Also, don't lose sight of, hey, there's risks. Have those risks been incorporated into your plan? And if not, what changes to the plan need to be made to incorporate the risks at the right level? Does the plan itself line up with your entitlements? So if you go through this whole plan and it says, I need 1,000 users for this software component on August 1st, and then I need 2,000 users starting on, let's say, July 1st of next year, and you know that those are going to be correct and it's not lined up with the contract, then it's time to go back and talk to your account team about how can you resolve this, right? But you definitely want those things to be in sync. And then finally, are there any SAP services that might bolster your adoption plans, either speed up your adoption, speed up your time to value? There's a number of free services that are either free now, not always to be free, or free forever. It just depends. And there are a lot of services that are not free, but worth every penny that you might pay for them. It's easy for me to say that as an SAP person, but understand that 6 months ago, I was a customer. I guess 9 months now. I was a customer, and I would have told you the exact same thing sitting in the seat of the customer. Before I move on, is there any questions on this?
No questions, keep going. Okay. We got 6 minutes left, right?
It's going to be no problem because I'm almost through with what I can do here. There's a slide in here for access to more information on Lean, Signavio, Cloud ALM, and then some components that sit around the edges of it, the Architecture Center, the Business Accelerator Hub, and then the build process automation components. One thing I will say is whatever plans you're making, don't make those plans and exclude BTP from your planning. I'm not pushing BTP at you, but what I'm really saying is you're going to find that in an S4 world, you simply can't operate without some BTP. You could minimize it to some extent, but opening up, it's like opening a toolbox full of tools. And all of a sudden you realize, hey, I've got a tool that I didn't know I had, and I can utilize it. And if I utilize it and I utilize it in a small enough fashion, it can be free. This is something that you just don't experience that in the software world very often. So don't look past that because BTP is remarkably, remarkably powerful. It will be the core of getting end-to-end AI set up. You could certainly have AI functioning in your S4 instance without having tons of BTP. But if you're talking about the end-to-end portfolio of SAP products, or 2 of them, or 3 of them, or 5 of them, how those products talk to each other is, generally speaking, utilizing some components of BTP. At a minimum, it would utilize the security services. This is another busy slide. This talks about some of the SAP services that are available to accelerate your time to value. Again, won't go through all of this. What I will offer to you guys, since we're running a little bit late here, is if anybody has questions, you don't know where to turn, you don't know where to go, feel free to contact me. My contact information will be in the presentation materials, and I will point you in a direction. The best place to start is your account team. So if you know who your account exec is or your managing partner, that's the best place to start. If you have an architect assigned, that's another great place to start. But in the absence of your knowledge of those people, please feel free to contact me and I'll put you in touch with the right person. So, quick takeaways. The integrated tool chain is critical to success. It's critical to you achieving the value that you have invested so much money to achieve. And without it, you can't tie everything together. That also will assist you in getting the proper governance set up, building the right decision-making frameworks, etc. Target architecture is also critical to the success. So spending your time understanding the reference business models, how your actual software use and consumption needs to align to those processes, and then ultimately utilizing that data to drive your target architecture is an absolutely critical component to be successful in achieving value. And embracing the opportunities that Clean Core, AI, Business Data Cloud, and BTP offer you today. You know, Clean Core is just one little component here. I didn't have a chance to talk about it. There's a couple of slides in the appendix that talk about some of these things in more detail. Don't look past Clean Core, because Clean Core is, if you strip everything else away, the fastest way to ensure that you don't have issues during an upgrade. It gives you a path by which you can say, I know exactly what small footprint I have of custom things that sit inside of the core, and now I know what I have to test in addition to what SAP is already testing on my behalf as a new release comes out. That can cut months and months and months off of an upgrade schedule. Okay. Planning for the adoption of the suite is critical to achieving your value. The planning is end-to-end. It takes into account planned future consumption, but it needs to be based on your actual requirements, whether it's how many headcount you have, and this is going to sound like a really unpalatable thing, but you know, companies large and small go through all sorts of different things in the expansion and contraction of their business. Sometimes you're going to have less staff next year than you had this year. You need to kind of know that in some form or fashion. And this is really where you need to align with the senior leadership teams of your organization to understand it. That's critical, because if you don't know what your actual user needs are going to be, what your actual volume needs are going to be, whether it's a revenue-based item or a cost-based item, you're not going to be able to execute on a proper adoption plan. And then don't forget to revisit this thing periodically. Okay. And finally, you as the architects, you are critical to the success of this. Take this stuff back with you. Act as a change agent. It's easy to look at it and say, hey, this is really complex. I don't know if I can do this. Suspend your disbelief and remember that everything that was once deemed impossible is possible. Or I shouldn't put it that way. The things that are possible today are possible because somebody saw it as impossible and took the task to make it possible. It's the same thing with implementing SAP. There's no reason that we can't take that approach. Okay, stay interlocked with your SAP account team. If you take one thing away, take that away. That your account team is your entrance to resources to accelerate your transformation. Okay, and if you have any trouble figuring out who your account team is, my contact information is here. Okay, that's it. I could have probably spoken for a little bit longer, but we lost about 10 minutes at the beginning. So I don't think we even have time for questions, but I'm willing to stay and entertain it if anybody has them.
No, Larry, we have to move on to the next session. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yep. All right. No problem, guys. Have a great day, and good luck, everybody.
Thanks. Take care. Good job. So I think we're going to have our next session.